Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT ranked meta video. Our analysts are here to go through the 10-10 meta for each stage of the game. This patch has remained fairly diverse, though it certainly favors reroll compositions. Let's jump on in, beginning with the early game. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Okay, let's get back to the video, and to begin, let's go over the early game, starting with items. First, Glove. Glove is still a high priority because it's used in Shredder and builds into defensive items for most carries. Glove is a fantastic item for Last Whisper, Infinity Edge, Quicksilver, and Trap Claw. It even makes into Hand of Justice, which is an all-around good item, and Shroud of Stillness is still very underrated at the moment. Sword, Rod, Bow, and Tear are all in the same category of components that can help define what composition you may want to go for that game. Sword goes into many items, notably Deathblade, Infinity Edge, and Guardian Angel. The first two generally imply some type of physical damage carry such as Xayah, Jhin, or even Kha'Zix in Void Brawler. Guardian Angel is just an overall great defensive item. Rod and Bow make mainly into kill items, with Rageblade and RFC being at the top of that list. Rod can be used for Morellonomicon for Kayle or Kai'Sa, as well as Deathcap or Ionic in multiple builds. Tear is a bit more narrow in what you can do with it, but if you start with the Tear, it does open the route of running Ziggs, Hyper Roll, which is a build that needs a lot of Tears. Chain Vest is also a worthwhile pickup because of Bramble Vest, Red Buff, and Guardian Angel. Belt and Cloak are basically filler components that you can use for a lot of different items, so you'll be able to make something from them, but they are definitely lower priority when it comes to components. Alright, that's it for components and different items. Let's now move on and talk about champions and traits. Well, as usual, you want to play your strongest board. That means picking up pairs and playing what you hit. Upgraded champions will, in most cases, do more for your early boards than specific traits. Focus more on pairs than looking for the right combination of champions. If you have the option for both upgrades and traits, then here's a few to consider. 2 Vanguard remains a potent frontline option early game and is definitely good to run if you get an upgraded Poppy or Leona. A 1-star Jace is also a fantastic second Vanguard. For champions good into Vanguard, you can go Ziggs with early Rebels or Twisted Fate in another Sorcerer. Xayah remains the best 1-cost champion early game if you have items to put on her. You don't have to play Xayah later, and you can just run a Xayah 2 with 1 or 2 items to carry you through stage 2 and most of stage 3. Graves, along with another Space Pirate or a Blaster, can be a good way to counter Xayah players early game because of his blind. Lucian is still a fantastic early game choice with early Cybernetics and Red Buff, which complements running Graves quite well. The Protector trait is a bit meh, but Jarvan and Rakan are really good champions right now, so running them together can work quite well. Brawlers, on the other hand, are great because their trait is just a flat increase on health. More health in the early game is a great way to gain an advantage. And for the last section of the early game, let's go over leveling and economy. Much like with champions, the formula hasn't really changed, as you want to aim to build your economy while buying champions as needed. It's very common to level aggressively on 2-2 and 2-5 to level 4 and 5 with level 6 at 3-2. This can vary depending on how much gold you have and your board strength. In general, try to push levels when you have a board advantage over most of the other players. Flipping to the opposite side of the spectrum for leveling, there is always the option to hyper roll. Basically, you don't level at all and look to roll down for specific champions on 3-1 right after Krugs. We'll go over more of this in the mid-game section with compositions, but essentially the goal is to get to around 50 gold by 3-1 and roll down for specific champions that you need for the composition. Doing this is meant to net you a quicker power spike in the mid-game. Overall, your goal for the early game is to try and maintain high health and build your economy. Next up is the mid-game. We've moved into stage 3, and now a good portion of the lobby is either level 6 or they're hyper rolling. Here's where the game splits into many different paths, and generally where you as the player will have to decide what route to go. One route is if you're playing a reroll composition, which is either hyper rolling for a 3-star 1-cost, or you're going to slow roll at level 5, 6, or 7. Another route is leveling to 7 on 4-1 or slightly earlier and rolling to find a direction for your composition. Basically, this means you roll to find a 4-cost carry and then begin filling in the gaps of your build as needed. Lastly, you can go the route of going for a fast 8. Fast 8 is still the same as usual, leveling on 4-3 to roll for 5-cost champions and trying to 2-star your 4-cost champion. The style of play is much riskier in the current meta because of how many reroll builds there are. If you fast 8 without high health and a good economy, you're putting yourself in a position to bottom 4 quite easily. So only try to fast 8 if you're in a really good position prior to 4-3. Instead of getting into the nitty-gritty of each of these playstyles, let's just go over a few meta builds. First up, we'll talk about a new hyper roll build in 10-10, Void Brawler. The core champions are all 4 brawlers and all 3 Void champions. At level 7, you're likely to have a Twisted Fate or another sorcerer in, and at level 8, an infiltrator like Fizz. Kazac's items can vary, though RFC is a must-have for him to keep him from running around and chasing targets. Infinity Edge is a common second item, though any damage item can do. Vel'Koz preferably wants Morellonomicon and needs a Quicksilver so that they can get their ability off uninterrupted at least once. In terms of how to play the build, it's fairly simple being a hyper roll composition. Roll down on 3-1 to find Kazac's 3. The priority of champions to roll for are Kazac's, then Malphite, and Twisted Fate. If you find Vel'Koz or Cho'Gath at any time, you should always buy them. If you don't find a Kazac's 3 on your initial roll, you can either go back to 50 gold and slow roll for him, or roll down again on 4-1. From that point, look to begin leveling. So that's one example of a hyper roll build. Now let's touch on a slow roll composition, Mech Infiltrator. The core champions are, of course, all of the mech pilots, Kai'Sa as the main infiltrator carry, with Shaco and Kha'Zix rounding out the composition at level 6. At level 7 and 8, you either want a sorcerer in, usually Lux, and a Valkyrie. If you're unable to procure a demolitionist charge for Kai'Sa, you can also play Ziggs or Gangplank for demolitionist on your super mech. Super mech items are defensive in nature, such as Bramble Vest or Warmogs. A path you can go is picking up dodge items such as Shroud of Stillness, Quicksilver, and Trapclaw. Kai'Sa works well with Morellonomicon and Seraphs, but by far her best and most important item is the Demolitionist Charge. Without it, Mech Infiltrator will have a harder time getting to top 2. Any extra items for this build can go on Shaco and Kha'Zix after. Overall, this build is simple like most reroll compositions. Aim to get to level 6 quickly with a good economy and preferably above 50 health. From there, you'll roll each round looking for priority champions. Once you've hit Kai'Sa 3 and Annie 3, you can begin leveling while you look for Rumble 3. A big part of this composition is scouting, as you want to reposition your mech every single round. For the last build we'll go over, we have Kale Carry. This is a build that generally aims to roll a bit at level 7 in order to find a Kale, plus the champions needed to fill in the rest of the composition. The core champions are Kale, Shen, Xayah, Kassadin, Wukong, Blitzcrank, and Ezreal at level 7. At level 8, you'll replace Blitzcrank with Thresh and add in Misfortune for Valkyrie. There are a ton of variations of this build, which will generally drop Chrono to add in any number of other champions or traits, but a few common ones include Mystic with Lulu and Karma, or Gangplank with another Demolitionist. Kale is a flexible carry that can use multiple items. Rageblade, RFC, Guardian Angel, Quicksilver, and Morellonomicon are all common items that you can play on her. In general, a good rule of thumb is at least 1 attack speed item and 1 defensive item. Misfortune is the second carry in this build and does well with any ability power or mana focused items, though Quicksilver is also essential for her to cast her ability uninterrupted. These builds are just a small snapshot of the current meta. There are many different compositions that you can play for each playstyle. All in all, it's a very diverse meta, though it certainly favors reroll builds. Now it's time to go over the late game. This is around stage 5 after Raptors, but closer to stage 6. This part of the game has a lot of focus on positioning and scouting. There's less to do in terms of leveling and power spikes, but let's touch on what those actually are. Level 9 is the end goal for most games, though it's difficult for any reroll compositions to reasonably get there by the end of the game. But if you are able to get there, oftentimes level 9 is a nice way to round out your comp. Generally, this will happen by adding in traits to round out your build, such as Celestial, Chrono, or Mystic. Another route is adding a standalone champion that is simply strong on their own. These will usually be legendary champions, with the best being Lulu, Thresh, Gangplank, and Misfortune. Gangplank is one of the best legendary champions in the game and can be added in at level 8 or 9 for most compositions. Just 2-star him, slap on a Guardian Angel, and pair him with another Demolitionist. It's definitely an investment, but he's an extremely potent late game champion. So when should you go to level 9? If you're not losing rounds terribly late game and you have the money to do so, you can aim to level 9 sometime after Kayn. In the case of not being strong enough late game to level, it's often better to roll and try to hit upgrades to stabilize. It may be harder to find 2-star 5-cost champions, but it's better to spend your gold and lose than lose while having 50 gold. Lastly, you can look to 3-star a 4-cost champion. This can be done at level 8 or 9. It mostly depends on how much health you have and your board state. Make sure to scout before before committing to a 3-star 4 cost. One last thing to go over are galaxies. This will be a quick section just going over the basics for some of the galaxies. Alright, first up is the Lilac Nebula. Not much has changed for this galaxy, as Kale and Aurelia are still the top picks. Overall, it's best to keep in mind that you don't have to keep the 4-cost champions or build a composition around them. Trying to overly force something when presented with better options is a good way to get a bottom 4 placement. Nicoverse is interesting because it's actually a good galaxy for more standard builds and less so for hyperroll compositions. Because everyone has 2 Nicos, the scaling of the mid and late game is skewed a lot, as players can hit 2-star, 4 and 5 cost champions much earlier in the game than usual. While it doesn't mean you will instantly lose as a hyperroll build, it does make it much more likely that you'll get outscaled. Next, we have the trade sector. The galaxy is designed for those that want to press D. It's the best time to play either a hyperroll or slow roll build, but make sure to scout. If you aren't playing a hyperroll build, you can level aggressively to increase your chances in the shop of finding higher cost champions. Super Dense Galaxy has changed to now happen at the beginning of stage 3 instead of when you hit level 5. This is nice as it doesn't force the whole lobby into one playstyle. Super Dense matters mostly for the late game, where you get an additional trait and champion to slot into your build. Star Hustler is a deceptive galaxy, as there can be huge gaps in power right after stage 2 carousel. Always be wary of what others are grabbing from the carousel and try to play what you got off the carousel until you can pivot out of it safely in order to save yourself from taking too big of losses in stage 2 and 3. Galactic Armory is the newest galaxy and another one that's easy to get baited into going for builds you may not be suited for. Basically, don't focus on the initial 2 items specifically for a build later, play normally with what champions and other components the game gives you, and then factor in the galactic items. Otherwise, you may end up contesting the same build as several other players, which will not end in your favor most of the time. That's going to be it for today's video, folks. We hope this breakdown of the ranked meta will help you all climb in the last few days before the patch arrives. Let us know in the comment section below how your rank climb is going and what you're looking forward to in patch 10.11. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.